step. Now, before I start tack soldering, I want to point out a couple things. I've got some horseshoe nails pointing here. This, I created a little more up here because I want that to look like a stem. So instead of giving myself that 1/16 of an inch spacing like I have done with all the other pieces, I want that to be a little thicker. So I'm just going to fill that in with some solder and have it look a little thicker. Up here, one thing that will help as you solder, you want your solder seams to be perfect. Or eye flowing. So for instance, I have this piece laid out and then the next piece touching it kind of has that little jog right there. And so if I literally just rearrange these a little bit so that it has that continuous eye flow on your line, that's going to make this look a little bit nicer. So I'm going to move both of these up just a smidgen so that those lines, so that gives me one constant line through there. Same with this up here. So I've got a big gap here and I've got a jot here. So I want to make sure that I take this and just move it around a little bit so that that line becomes consistent. It'll make a big difference when you're soldering. And you can see how I'm just literally nudging the pieces with my horseshoe nail to get them centered so that they look a little nicer. Okay, so then we got to load up our bricks with flux. I literally will just like dip it in and then rub it on the side, rub it off. You don't need very much flux at all. If you can see the flux on it, wipe it off. You don't need very much. Okay, so that's what the brush looks like. And then I start with, and I normally use my hand, going all the way around, and wherever there is a seam, about 1/4 of an inch in, I'm not going all the way to the edge, I want to come in a little bit, and I'm just adding a little bit of flux to that. And I'm going to do that all the way around. What we want to do is we want to get these outside pieces secure. So just a little dab. You can see I'm not hardly putting anything on it. I don't even know if you can see it on the camera, but just a little bit, and I haven't got these totally centered here. You can see that. I can adjust it as I go. But the main thing is, once I start tack soldering these, I want to make sure that these edges are all the way up to the edge so that my panel finishes out correctly. So just a little flux. You'll know that you've got some flux on it. This is a good one. You can kind of see it in the light. You can see where the flux is kind of cleaned the copper foil a little bit, and it's a little more golden color where there's no flux on it. So that way you can tell, just visually looking at it, that it has some flux on it. And again, you don't need much. You don't want it all piled up, because the more you put on, the more you're going to have to clean off. So I'm going to try to get this all set up here. I've got my soldering iron warmed up. Let me move that over here. I'm going to set my flux cup over to the other side. Alright, my iron is hot. Get rearranged here a little bit so you guys can see what I'm doing. Alrighty, and I'm going to tack solder with my 50/50. And again, the most important thing is, I'm going to remove my horseshoe nails that I was using as markers to talk about. Again, I want to make sure that my glass is against my border so that my window finishes out the right size. And that there's the same amount of gap in there. So I'm just going to gently do that. Okay. I'll just literally just warm enough. Okay. So I'm just literally going to swipe a dot onto my soldering iron and tack it down. Swipe it, tack it. Swipe, tack it. I usually will do that right over where I'm working, so if it drips, it's not going to drip down onto my glass and possibly crack it. Come up here. Okay, right there. All I'm doing is getting these held down. I'm going to turn it so you can see me working across there. Held down against the frame. Not trying to do anything fancy with it at this point. Just a little drip. Flat solder down. I don't want it build up. It works actually better if it's flat. So I'm doing nothing but tacking right now. I'm going to kind of do this in small little increment steps on videos so that people that just want certain information about it can just watch a short video and not go through 25 minutes of watching me tack solder these. These lined up. You'll notice I'm just swiping and touching the iron. I'm not dragging it, I'm not doing anything. Sometimes just letting it drip off of your soldering iron is great because you're not disturbing your pieces there. If the solder won't stick to it, just take your brush, add a little more flux.
Solder neck.
I need to turn my iron up a little bit. So, more. All right, got the whole border. Next step that I'm going to do is go in and I'm going to hold down the pieces and flux where all the pieces join and make sure they're all evenly spaced there. And I'm only fluxing where they're meeting, where they're joining. Kind of taking little bite-sized pieces. You can see here's a spot here. My paper got wet. So as I'm soldering, I'm going to want to make sure that I hold those down flat. That's why you want to keep your pattern paper as dry as possible so you don't get these little ripples in it. Okay, so literally I'm just going to spend the next however amount of time fluxing and centering. I use a horseshoe nail to get these all lined up. So that there's about a 1/16 of an inch spacing between all of them. Just give them a little nudge. They want to stick a little bit more because that flux is on them now. But the next step is, get this done here, I'll show you. Get them all spaced. I want that solder to be able to seep down between each one of these pieces for strength. And you can see where you've been because it's going to be that different color, remember? So there's one. Okay, so here we go. Wipe it on my wet sponge just to clean it off. Grab my iron. My pieces are spaced where I want them to go, so I'm literally just going to swipe and tap. I want to tack all of these down. If the solder doesn't stick, there's no flux there. So just move on. It's okay, we can come back. Sometimes you can just use the edge of your soldering roll to reposition a piece if you need to. I'm just very gently adding dots of solder at every intersection. Wipe it on my sponge. That piece is positioned a little bit better. Okay, there we go. Again, it works best if you're right on top of where you want, just in case that drips. And use your fingers. I'm going to pull that leaf over a little bit. Come on. You need to turn it up just a little bit. There we go. And I haven't dipped my brush again. I'm just going. There's plenty of flux on my glass that I can borrow from. So if there's some down here, just pick it up with your brush. There we go. Grab a horseshoe nail if it's not wanting to go exactly where you want. Swipe and dab. So I want to get these all anchored so they're not shifting around on me. Once I get them anchored down, then I can go back. See how it doesn't shift on me now that I've got those anchored? Then I can go back and start adding more flux. And my goal is to just get this tinned flat. I want to get that solder down in between the gaps. Go. Keep it as flat as possible. You'll do yourself a favor if you do that. Crank up my iron a little bit. I like to move fast. This new iron is not broken yet. I gotta wants to pick up. Okay. See how we've been working on it? And whenever I want to get more flux, dip it in and then wipe it all off. And then I can go, and all the pieces that have been tacked down, I can start adding flux to those. This is a corner, so I'm just going to hold it with my fingers as I add the flux so they don't shift around on me. Okay, so just literally I'm just kind of working my way up through here. Keeping that 1/16 of an inch as much as you can. There we go. Let's put that in. There it is. Lost my solder. All right. There we go. Rub a little dot. Hold it in place. Oops, no flux there. There we go. Little dab will do ya. Alrighty. Gets easier the further you go because they become more stable. Come on, solder. I'm not liking this new tip. It doesn't want to grab the solder. See that slide on me? So I'm just going to heat that up and pull it back over. Oops. You can see I like don't use hardly any flux. The more flux you use, the more you got to clean off. Look at these flowers. So solder. I haven't tried this solder. I do. When I solder, I do wipe it down with a towel, because you can see it's a little bit cruddy in there. So I do kind of just keep a towel handy and wipe it down before I use it. This new iron's giving me fits, and it's, can you hear that rattling? I wonder if it's not making contact all the way in there. Big glob there, so I'll just take it and melt it into the seam. Yeah. I like the sound of that. Should not break a soldering iron on when you're doing live feed. So anyway, you get the idea. I'm literally going to go through and just put little dots. And I'm literally not hardly touching the glass if I can help it, because I don't want them shifting all over. There we go. Now it's holding. I guess I just needed to shake it a little bit. That's how it's supposed to be acting now. Holding that solder on there for a little bit. It's rattling. You have to tighten that set screw or something. So as I continue to tack all these together and fight with the new iron, alrighty. I'm going to melt that dot, shift that piece over a little bit. Maybe I'll melt that dot. There we go. Just nudging it with this solder, or with the horseshoe nail. Yeah. Oops. Too much. I just melted that off. I held it off to the side, melted it, let it drip down. Okay, so these are all stable and sturdy. I've got all of these tacked down. If I need to go back to one and melt one down, I can do that. Okay, because I want to keep it as flat as possible. All right, so I'm going to continue on. I may unplug this and see if I can figure out what's going on with it. Might go over to my weller, use my weller for a little while. There we go. All right, and so, oops, sorry. And so it's going to continue, and I'll post this out on Facebook also. But I'm just going to continue on dabbing where all my seams are, making sure they're spaced well, and get these all tacked together. See you in a little bit.